So what's going on? I mean, are you in North Carolina or?
I just got back from the Florida Keys a week and a half ago. So I've been home in North Carolina, yeah, for about 10 days. I'm going on a cruise with my wife Sunday.
Oh, I actually didn't know you got. Congratulations. When did that happen?
We have our 3-year anniversary
Holy shit.
next in April.
Holy moly. Wow. Do you have kids that I don't know about?
Yeah, no kids, just
Okay.
one very devious labradoodle.
Okay, nice, nice. All right, so let's just a little bit of background. You obviously started in the Northeast. You were based in New York, and honestly inspired an entire generation of kayak fishing, right? I mean, that's how I got started kayak fishing, just watching your videos back in the day. And I just in preparation for this podcast, I went back to your older videos and I noticed a lot of them were missing. Did you remove a chunk of your oldest videos?
A lot of them were demonetized years back, so
Okay.
they don't really serve much of a purpose on the platform. So I kind of took them out. I actually have them. I did anything that was left. So you can re-download everything from Google. That's
Okay.
Google Takeout at the same quality you uploaded it. So I was kind. It's this and is part of the projects of all these drives that I have stacked up to re-go through everything
Yeah.
and it's hit the burner that I want to re edit everything and kind of revamp it, do all that stuff, but there's thousands of projects that are currently stacked up on my desk and it's there and someday I hope I can get to it. But yeah, I do have them all re-downloaded into those drives to really go through them all again, re-edit them and cut out the cringe and they're all only 1080p by today's standards. That's not very good.
No, no, that's perfect. I mean, it captured that moment in time because you started when, like, it's got to be early.
2016? 2016 was when I went. Yeah, I was
Okay,
started filming. 2018, after that realization, after 2 years of getting out of guiding, I realized I can probably make the YouTube thing work. Just the Northeast overhead and limited seasons were the biggest determining factor. Really, the overhead was the determining factor when you go to business school. The first thing you learn is, you're not going to make money for a few years when it's time to grow.
right.
And the overhead there pretty much dictated I'd be out of business for just storage at that time. Something like storage was enough to kick me out. So that was the big reason I ended up, I always kind of said, well, I could always come back for the months when it's good. And I still come up almost every summer for at least a month or two. But the whole thing was, yeah, in 2018, I pulled the trigger to go full time. So 2017, I was still living up north. In 2018, I made that transition to go full time into YouTube. So 2016, I was uploading probably once every 2 weeks already at that point. Um, really terrible videos by today's standard. They're not very good now, in my opinion, but they're even worse back then.
I thought. I mean, that was, I guess, the dawn of YouTube fishing in general, and people opened their videos by just fishing. I mean, there obviously were no drone shots and there were no quick edits and cuts, but I kind of like that. Like I don't like a lot of preamble and, fluff around a fishing video. But I always thought it was a little earlier because I think I got my inflatable Hobie in 2016. But by then you must have had a few videos up already.
Might have had like done, yeah, at that point I was probably doing like one or two every 3 months maybe. It was very sporadic, not
Right.
up to the modern content demands. So to me, in my head, all that sporadic uploading stuff is just like
That's like
whatever I
pre.
did.
Right, right.
It's not the modern demand of
No.
1 to 2 videos a week or whatever it is to make it in the content world.
Yeah.
And I guess I was so broke that living with roommates and never would I imagine that a mortgage and all these things would have to be a part of the content demand.
No, it's
Things change.
Yeah, but I mean those
That's a
videos,
good problems to
yeah,
have.
exactly. No, but those were classic videos, and like I said, they really are a part of history because I don't think anyone else was uploading saltwater kayak fishing at that volume or
Robert
level.
Field, there was definitely a few. No, I think there was a few guys. There was Robert Field for sure. Uh,
Yeah,
and I think regionally,
yeah.
in that region, there wasn't much.
Well, it's a
Uh,
big region. I mean, species like striped bass, fluke, tog. I mean, you were doing all the northeast species from the kayak and from a Hobie. I don't know if there were, like I'm sure there were kayak fishing videos from like regular kayaks, but that didn't interest me. It's the fact that you could get around with your feet, and Hobie was the only company at the time that you could do
so
that with.
you got to give credit where credit's due. Those guys from the Chesapeake Bay were definitely ahead of the curve by a decade.
Okay.
Like the Kayak Kevin and those guys, and it was Jay and a couple of the other guys. They were really ahead of this curve of because they were doing DVDs and stuff like that, and they
Okay.
were pushing limits for sure in terms of what they were doing at that point in time. And the Chesapeake Bay is not the Northeast's fluke or flounder summer flounder fishery, but they were still catching some 23 and 24 good sized fish out that way, and also just pushing the bounds of where they were going and some of the stuff they were doing, like Christmas Eve 40-inch plus stripers and 44-degree water was pretty much now you'll get run out of the room on Facebook saying you're interested in do that because of how unsafe it is and everyone got really soft. But back then there was no Facebook. These guys were really hardcore and
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
pushing
I'm
up.
I'm not aware of that, again, like my introduction was YouTube and that platform. I mean, there were people kayak
Yeah,
fishing at a high level before YouTube and before a lot of people were aware of it. Do you have a kayak sponsor now, or are you free to use whatever kayak you want?
it's been yeah. I'm free to use whatever I want, and that's kind of the way I kind of want to keep it.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
stuff floated around a lot, and I kind of avoid it for the most part. And every time there are brands I like, and the brands have changed, and we go through the laundry list of every kayak I've tried, and then the kayaks I end up sticking with.
Hmm.
I've tried a lot of brands, and I could probably make a top five pretty easily in my head of what I would use. But yeah, I do like to try a lot of new kayaks. I've been looking at the Hobie Lynx all the time now. Every day I look at it, I'm just nervous I'm gonna kill it quickly, but I do love the concept of that. And I was even lifting the Hobie Passport in the shop here at the 10.5 foot ones to just plop in the swamp and stuff like that. I did, but anyway, yeah, I'm free to use kind of whatever I want.
Okay, nice. Yeah, like I was gonna ask you because I remember us talking about the links, maybe a year ago. The links might not stand up to your level of abuse, but if it's open water, that's the only thing. Like you can't, bump it
I
in.
wouldn't use it. No, I absolutely wouldn't use it for open water. It would be my light side of the road creek, stuff that I would want to use it for crappies and
Right.
a lot of swamps where I live, right? And there are a lot of like pretty expansive cypress tree areas. So offer some largemouth bass stuff, crappie, bowfin, and but they're just like they're tight areas. They're not going to get kicked up by wind or any of that stuff. And they don't need the integrated setup like the Old Town EPDL does,
No.
where I don't have to cover fast and hit spots. I can cover a mile and everything is worth hitting within this mile range. And that Old Town EPDL doesn't give you any benefit for that sort of environment versus the links where I'm off on the side of the road. If I got to hit a little ditch to drag it down. It's only what is it, 50 pounds unrigged,
It's 41 or 42 pounds. Yeah. Yeah.
unrigged, and then you put
Yeah.
everything on it. If there's a little bit of a slide, I got to go down. This isn't going to land on top of me and hurt me. So all these things where I got to lift it over my head, that's
Yeah.
doable. These are doable things, is to lift it over my head, to get it over a guardrail, right? Like all these things that are just
Yeah. But the shell is a little bit fragile because it's not a rotomotor shell. So that's the trade off with the links. But for me, like, it was the perfect kayak for me because I don't do any like Rambo style launches, and like I usually wheel my kayak into the water gently. So, if that's the case, then it's perfect. Compared to the Outback, it's literally half the weight. So now the Old Town PDL, that is the assisted,
Yeah.
right? So you went with that instead of the one with the spot lock.
Well, I've been on both of them.
Hmm.
I've probably put over 1,000 hours on both of these models.
Okay.
Um, so I had the Old Town Autopilot, which has the spot lock, for about 2 years, maybe 3 years. I had it for over 3 years. And as soon as they got the Old Town Electric EPDL, I've had that for over a year. And the drive, what's nice is they could tell me how many hours I've used the
Okay. Right.
motor, and I'm over 1,000.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're definitely you're like tip of the bell curve when it comes to usage. Kayaks, tackle. The last time we spoke, you were having a little bit of difficulty with your wheels. Did you get that sorted out, or
Yeah,
is that
I go through reels at alarming rates. All sorts of reasons. Every reason you could think of, that's why I'm going through reels. Occasionally they're getting dunked. Occasionally, something corrodes out and everything just explodes and falls apart. I'm changing stuff. I'm trying new reels pretty often. Um, so yeah, I definitely go through reel rods. I don't go through as heavily actually. Rods occasionally I break something, but rods have been pretty steady in the garage. Reels, probably two to three show up in rotation every year. New
right?
ones into
Right.
regular use. Sometimes I just phase things out because um, I've, sometimes better options come up, or I just realize, even though I'm making it work, there's probably something better for me to use.
For sure. Did you ever get that twin power?
Yep.
And that's working out so far. I mean, you've only had it for like a week.
2 weeks. Yeah, it's okay. I
Yeah.
haven't been. I've got a twin power. I really like those Daiwa Certates, but they didn't hold up to my abuse. Um, I've got actually, one of the favorite reels I have right now because they're inexpensive to replace when they have a problem is those new Daiwa Fuego LTs, this current generation that just came out,
Okay.
are excellent. They aren't perfect, but uh, for $110, their weight, what they can do, they're capable reels for $110, and
Yeah.
I've got five of them in the garage right now, and I kind of rotate them all, and I got them all about 9 months ago. Not a single one has hit the point where it's unusable.
Interesting. Do you know
Uh,
if that one has mag seal?
yeah, it does have mag seal.
It does. Interesting. Yeah, because in my experience, that never. But from the surf, it's a little different because that water is very sandy,
Yep.
and I always feel that the mag seal really doesn't hold up to that kind of surf water conditions.
And I don't throw those Daiwa Fuegos at really big stuff often. Like the
Right.
Certate, I was taking out for the 40-inch plus drum for a full month, and it was done by the time it got to the Florida Keys. So this is probably within a 3 month span that reel started showing critical issues. While the Fuegos I'm using kind of in the creek salt marsh areas, brackish water,
Right.
they are getting some use and there are catching a lot of fish and are seeing the salt environment, but they aren't getting the drag torture tests quite as often, or just seeing that maybe the splash over the reels and stuff like that. I mean, I've got Shimano Vanfords, I've got 2-3 Stratics that are inoperable.
Interesting.
I've got a lot of stuff in the garage that's been absolutely tortured. I always say the pens, absolutely. If you have a lot of stuff to do when you get off the water and you work full time, and it's like you don't have time to work on something when you're off the water, the pens are. I mean, I have the first pen spin fisher, probably the first 100 that were produced. It is still without a single issue on that. It makes a
Nice.
squealing noise on the bushing because they didn't have whatever on the line roller, but other than that, that spin fisher has caused zero issues. The only problem is the line roller is so chafed down from all the sand and braided line. it now frays line too quickly because it's seen so much
Right,
use.
right. Man,
So
that
it's
sounds
probably got edges on it now.
yeah, no, my OCD just went through the fuck. I mean, but that's right because in order to maintain these reels, like you do have to spend time. Like I basically have copies of every reel that I use regularly. So I have two Vanquishes, same exact size. And if I'm fishing 2 days in a row, because after you rinse them, you kind of have to let them air dry before you hit them with oil and this and that. But my level of OCD is pretty incredible too. So we're like probably polar opposites when it comes to that. If someone doesn't have time, like you said, a pen, even like a small VR, like a Van Staal, like something that they don't have to think about, is really the way to go with spinning reels. So
Right. So like the pens, like literally it's like a sickness. Like I'll buy one of these other reels and then I'll use them and I love them when they're working properly. And then before you know it, I'm back on a pen.
right,
My pens get grabbed out of the rack because these reels, and I haven't ordered anything new to replace them. It's literally a vicious cycle of every season that whatever new reels I try, they're torn down and they're either sent back or parts are out of stock. Like right now, the Vanfords, I'm waiting for like every part on the Vanford.
yeah, yeah,
Everything's out of stock for 6 months. What am I going to do? Let the inventory rot? I usually just sell it on Facebook Marketplace as is,
right, right.
wait for the newest, latest, greatest thing that comes out. I grab the pen that's still working, get the newest, greatest thing, and then I hit the vicious cycle of everything that I broke is also now out of stock from Dio or Shimano. And then here I go again, right back on Facebook.
As yeah, no, that's crazy. I don't think I've ever even held a pen spinning reel. Like I've held pen like conventional reels, but yeah, I mean as a backup,
My
certainly.
rule of thumb with pens, right? Anything under a half ounce is in your regular throwing arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ever look at a pen.
Right,
But as soon as you're regularly from 3/4 ounces and up, your pen is now competitive with these other brands, in my opinion,
right.
based on its longevity. But if you have to use a 3/8 ounce, a 1/4 ounce, just never even look at that thing. But,
Yeah.
but if a 3/4 ounce size weight, a lot of it has to do with my gripes with pen. Um, Weight is annoying, but weight you can get used to. Line management's the biggest problem with all these pen reels.
Okay, just a quick announcement. My hardbait flounder virtual lesson is now live on the website, cookingandfishing.com. This covers both jerkbaits and crankbaits, and just like the single jig lesson, once you purchase it, you will have access to it forever. Also, people who own the lesson can contact me for any technical questions, and I'll do my best to clarify things. I put a ton of work into this one, so check it out at cookingandfishing.com. Thank you, and back to the podcast. I mean, there's no comparison between Penn and, especially Shimano. I think Shimano is king when it comes to line management. And they
Right.
really kind of double down on that every new reel that they come out with. But what you're really paying for is in the two extremes, like very finessey stuff where all that finesse kind of sophistication when it comes to parts, and then also at I suppose the really like big game kind of category where you need 35, 40 pounds of drag,
Well, I
to
wouldn't even say you need that from a pen ever. Were you talking about Shimano's?
yeah, I was just talking about, like really high end Shimano or Daiwas, like the Stella, Saltiga, then down to like the small Vanquishes where, it's very finesse and everything just fits. But everything in the middle, I think a lot of reels can do the job,
Yeah.
you
I,
know.
I find the pen's drag system for that $200 range is excellent.
Okay.
You have an excellent, you never have to work on it. It is super easy to adjust. It's super sensitive. It's called Dura Drag. Their drag system is just as good as all those It's noisier, sure, and it's got a
Right.
very clear sound. But in terms of its actual performance, the slammers, the spin fishers, the authority, the battle, none of these have any issues on that end.
Okay.
I've never had a drag issue. They have oscillation issues, like you said, line management issues. Uh, Slammers now have ball bearings in them again, which they suck. The Clash have bearings in their
Right.
line rollers again. But in terms of drag, zero. I've used every pen that came out in the last 5 to 6 years now, and multiples, not a single issue with any. I can't recall a single drag failure, something not operating right in the drag systems. So that system is perfect for your 5 to 15 pound range that they have on those
Right.
2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 size reels. I can't say the same with Shimano. That's for sure. Daiwa is definitely a little bit over Shimano in my experience on their whole arsenal of reels.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Shimano's that you're like, if you're using a 3000 size Stratic, that's a felt drag washer. I
Yeah.
don't know, I mean, there's Shimano improved their felt washers in the latest generation of Vanford.
2 weeks. I got 2 weeks out of the
Yeah,
shop. 2 weeks of just use in the Florida Keys before I got home and literally had to re-grease everything, clean it all off. I ordered some new washers literally 2 weeks before having to maintain a brand new Stratic.
right, right.
Frustrating if you're regularly fishing.
Yeah,
That that's a frustrating breakdown to happen that quickly. So the Stratic was that. The Twin Powers gave me issues with their drags already. I have this Twin Power SW. So my Shimano recent experience and let all the shills come at me. They come at me every time I speak good of Penn. I'll speak good of all three of these brands, and then I'll shit on all three of these brands also. So
yeah,
every time I have a rotating assault list of
right, right.
because I have different experiences with all three of them. But it all comes down, and we could even talk about like back in 2016, I was using Casking. They all have different values, and they all have different approaches in what they're good at. And so I even have one of the Caskings on one of my surf setups, the new capstan, and it's comparable to what's it called, a pen, and it has better line management. So I kind of like put it in the arsenal of just a sit and chunk reel.
Right.
It can handle 10 to 15 pound braid much better than my spin fishers and battles can in that size. So it being in that price range, it's useless for anything else. Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but to have it uh, be a surf fishing reel for sitting and chunking with good line management, I was like, well, it casts further than my pens.
Yeah.
Uh, I could fill it to the lip of the spool, unlike my pens, with light line. So they're
Right.
all these things. So you use the pens. The pens can't handle anything under 20 pound braid. 15 is maybe sometimes you can, but you're going to get the wind knots the minute there's a breeze on the water where you didn't, close the bail properly. It's guaranteed it's coming.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you
all
talk,
different.
yeah, like you talk about line management. I just like last year I spent a lot of time throwing larger baits in freshwater, like swim baits, glide baits, and stuff like that. And I got bored with that. This year I just got a couple of like very ultralight bass rods, and I got a C2500 Vanquish, which is basically like a trout reel. It's like 1,000 size, and I put 5 pounds straight fluoro on it. Complete nightmare the first day, because I couldn't like from a kayak or boat you can let the line out behind you and straighten it out, but straight fluoro. So now I went to 4 pound, and that seems to do the trick because it's such a small spool diameter that the
Yeah.
like even the 5 pound sniper was just rolling off the top. But yeah, that's the thing with spinning reels. Like at one point, if I could do everything with the baitcaster, I would. But now, there's many advantages to a spinning reel.
And the other thing is too, you told me I ordered a lot of these finesse braids, right? I ordered four different brands,
Right.
and I spooled one of my slammers with the 20 pound X braid to the lip, and I've had zero issues with it so far.
Oh, okay, good.
And I think it has. I don't know why yet.
Well,
I've only
20 Yeah, so the X braid is the repackaging of the YGK, but I think 20 pounds. So they went with the US diameter. So that's really like PE 2.5 or PE 3.
It
Yeah,
has something with the way it rolls off the reel
I mean
when I'm
that.
watching cast. It's so
Yeah.
like I usually use 8 strand braids and occasionally I've used other braids. But watching how that X braid was coming off it doesn't come off like a typical 8 strand braid. So I noticed maybe that has to do with something why it's not digging in on the wind knots with the pens. Because after I was using like a half-ounce jerk bait with my pen and I was noticing, I was like, I think by now I would have had a lot of wind knots
Hmm.
on a regular 8 strand braid. Doesn't matter. V2, Suffix 832,
Yeah.
all the popular ones. So the X braid was the first one that I noticed I didn't turn into a ball of yarn at that point on the Pen
Yeah,
Slammer.
that's pretty impressive. I mean, I it's the best braid I've ever used, but since I found it, I didn't really explore much beyond that. But I've used all the US brands, and when it's to do with the weave, like it's a very tight weave, and the coating they put on it makes it almost feel like a mono. There's no ridges. Eventually that coating will wear off, but it stays on a lot longer than any other braid that I've used. And it's not that expensive. I mean, that's one brand that if you go to any Japanese like retail website, they're always sold out. You know, it's like the standard braid that everyone uses over there. So, yeah,
Well, I mean, it definitely gave that pen reel a breath of fresh air. You know, it always comes down to like, yeah, like you said, well, the braid management, the casting distance on the pens aren't, but in terms of when you get into those 1 ounce ranges for the size of the reels, their cranking power is they're really powerful
right.
on the crank. So like versus other spinning reels that don't have that, they start to fight you when you're reeling in a lot of the
Right.
most 3000 size spinning reels from Daiwa and Shimano. When you're trying to move a 1 ounce lure, they're gonna fight you.
Yeah.
They're giving you that extra. The pens do not have this resistance like
Right.
so that's another like kind of a plus when you are throwing that 2 ounce stuff from your kayak or 1 ounce stuff, which isn't that often, right? It's not too often that you're throwing those larger size things. But when it comes into the arsenal, the pen is unmatched on that too. I mean, I've got the twin power, but still the feel of that more compact size. Sorry, I have a twin power SW, right?
Right.
The compact 2500 pens like that slammer is compact, and I mean it's still a big reel for a 2500, but it's
Hmm.
still compact enough in your hands that when you're cranking in your chest, you're able to move what those heavier weights are. You
Yeah,
know,
and you feel the power. There's more connection to that reel. Um, no, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, I don't like my fish are average 2 to 3 pounds fluke or bass, so it's not something that But people who get into striper fishing up here, I I don't even know what people use here anymore. I know there's.
BGs are popular and they have been forever, and the new BGMQs are pretty well. I don't have a BGMQ. I don't have one. I haven't used one yet. A lot of people like them so that I've spoken to in terms of that $200 price range.
Right.
But I have the SW, which I'm like the Twin Power SW, which I'm very lukewarm on. I have a 4000 Certate. So I've got a couple of things and I've used a few different things, but like I said, that cranking power, especially you start throwing plugs
Mm.
that are 1 ounce and they got a pretty big lip, or you're really throwing metal lures for false albacore, bonito, Spanish mackerel, and maybe it's in that 1 to 2 ounce range, and you want to really speed it and crank it. Sure, it's a heavy reel, but it's not going to fight you at all. You're going to be able to keep up with that momentum of ripping a heavier metal lure
Right.
across the surface with that speed and consistency.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. You
But you won't
mentioned.
cast as far as your you won't cast as far as your Shimano.
Right, right. No, I'm open to. I mean, it really depends on the application. Like people ask me if they can use this or that reel for fluking from the beach. Now, fluking from the beach is a freshwater thing. I mean that tackle, like you're using quarter ounce jigs. That's a freshwater bass
Yeah.
tackle. So then I tell people, no, you shouldn't be using your pens and your Van Stalls, and this is crazy. But obviously, if you're striped bass fishing, bluefish, and I get it, people want one setup to do a lot of things. I mean that not everyone is as focused as I am when it comes to this rod and reel is for this technique for one species of fish. But to each their own. I mean, like I said, my target species are generally of a similar size. But if you're out there targeting, like your next cast could be a 30-pound striper, but you don't want to bring like four different rods to do fluking and this and that. There's something to be said for that level of versatility.
Right. I mean, and a lot of times you go into environments where, fluke is definitely going to be like, especially in the Northeast. I could think of a lot of environments where you're likely to encounter at one point in the tide fluke, but you'll likely encounter big bluefish,
Yep.
striper, um, and if it's fall, you got full salmon.
Yeah.
The variables change a lot in certain and diverse
Yeah.
environments.
I mean, there's like most people will want to catch all those species. But for me, I just ignore everything. The number of times I've ignored albies busting right in front of me and I just kept jigging. I mean, it just depends on what you're after. But you said earlier that you do make trips up here, a month or two trips
Yep.
every year. And obviously, one of the species you're after up here is fluke.
Hmm.
What is the situation with fluke and flounder where you are in North Carolina? Like I know it's a whole mess, but just a brief kind of summary for people who don't know.
It's been closed pretty much 330 to 340 days out of the year. Right here we have southern flounder though, primarily.
Okay, that
Uh,
that was my next question.
so
Okay.
southern flounder range from North Carolina. They kind of stopped. I don't think they're really documented in the Chesapeake Bay.
Mhm.
They range from basically North Carolina down to somewhere mid Florida, maybe a little bit into South Florida. They have some migration. It's a little different to say where they're moving. Some like the fluke that go do this specific offshore inshore movement. Southern flounder, they don't know some of the migrations. Some end up kind of offshore. Some end up all over the coast.
Right.
So it's kind of a different fish in that regard. So the southern flounder. That's been closed. We do have some summer flounder in the northern part of North Carolina. Just like Chesapeake Bay is pretty much the start of the more consistent fluke or summer
Okay.
flounder and then as you run up the whole coast. And the third one we have is Gulf flounder, which almost look identical to summer flounder or fluke, but instead of five or more oscillated spots, so you look at the picture of a fluke, they got these little black rings.
Mhm.
uh, Gulf flounder only have three oscillated spots that kind of appear in a triangle. In terms of culinary, they taste exactly like fluke, in my opinion. You can't tell the difference. And they tend to grow from 16 inches to about 19 inches. Politics aside, all over being politics being politics, Gulf flounder and summer flounder, everyone wants that season to be open, but they want it shut down because of the fact there could be enough interaction with southern flounder. Because there's some spots you can interact with all three species
Right.
in the middle of summer. Like they'll all be in the same habit. But anyway, this is literally the worst rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So basically you allowed to target them or is it just a possession?
Very much looked down upon to target them as they are a threatened species. I do have southern flounder tags, so I
Okay.
did tag a few. I don't like the tagging method. I already kind of gave up on it. Basically, the tagging method is you stab them through the side, you run the tag through them, and then you have to tie basically a balloon
Yeah,
knot.
no, I don't like that.
And there's so much moving around through that. I was kind of, I know that they have reasons that they, whatever tag they did decide to use. I just kind of did it once to try it to see if it was right for me, and I gave up immediately. So it was kind of like a blank check to target them, but I also just felt like I'm potentially doing more damage to the resource
Yeah, yeah. And
than anything.
also, if none of your viewers can target them,
It was more of the point that it is such a um, it's a bycatch you can't avoid, so might as well put tags in them. It's
I
kind of what
see.
we're going to like. I go fishing anywhere in saltwater from May through October. It doesn't matter what technique I'm throwing, unless I'm like just surface fishing and trolling lures.
Right,
Anything that touches the bottom throughout the day, I'm nearly guaranteed to bump into a lot of these, a good amount of them. In certain environments, I'm guaranteed to see at least 8 to 10 through a day of fishing. So it gets to the point of, for your next question is why is it closed if you're seeing that many? Anyway, but the other question is, so it gets to the point where you just can't avoid them. So you're like, all right, let me try to at least put a tag in them. It doesn't look,
right,
it takes
right.
2 seconds. It doesn't look as bad, but still, I kind of gave that tag stuff a try, and I wasn't too happy with the method and how clean it was, and I was kind of just like, best thing I could do is just not fish saltwater around here when they're around. Maybe
Yeah,
just try to absolute best I can to do target fish that I won't interact with them or in environments the minimum amount that I'll see them. Because a lot of times the southern flounder and the red drum and speckled trout are really co-inhabiting a lot of areas here, and I pretty much avoid them altogether now because I know I'm going to interact with those flounder.
wow. Yeah, no, that's in terms of the difference of because they appear exactly the same to me. Can you tell by a glance the difference between a fluke and a southern flounder?
Pretty quickly you can.
Is it just the
Oscillated style.
spots? Okay,
That's
is it
the
just the spots? Now, in terms of just the body profile and shape,
little bit.
little bit?
So really, like most people will know the differences of the spots. I think the smallest thing to like that I notice is the weight class difference is a little bit different. So, uh, for example, a 28-inch Southern Flounder will typically be a 10-pounder, while a 28-inch Fluke or summer flounder is probably going to be about 8 pounds. So they do tend to pick up a little bit more weight for that length. That's really like one of the few different.
Yeah,
So
like I noticed when I watched some of your southern flounder videos, they look thick. I
yeah,
mean, they
the
look
right side is
fat.
thicker
Yeah.
in terms of
And
what you're
and and
filleting them.
yeah, but I mean, the variation in weight with fluke is something that really amazed me when I finally did get a boga a few years ago. I've caught 23 and a half inch fluke that were almost 7 pounds,
Wow.
like almost tipping 7 pounds.
Wow.
And I've measured one for someone else that was over 26 inches and wasn't even seven. This is during the same time period. So just getting a length, I mean, like I think length is really the basis because that's kind of, but then again, not every 24-inch fluke can reach 7 pounds before they grow out of that length.
Yeah.
So now I kind of appreciate both, like when you get a really short but fat fluke, I'm like, wow, that's a specimen. Um, yeah, but I do encourage like for people who do want to document their catch entirely, get yourself a 15-pound boga because otherwise you'll never know. Just getting a length. Now, in terms of technique for fluke and southern flounder, are they exactly the same? Like, is there anything you would do if you were to target one over the other?
The southern flounder are far more structure oriented than the summer flounder. It's not to say you won't catch southern flounder occasionally in areas you might find summer flounder, but structure is really important.
Structure as in like depth and contour lines?
Photog structure.
Okay. So you're talking like hard cover.
Photog structure, yeah,
Yeah.
hard structure. I mean, if you had to start, it's like literally wreck fishing is like
Right.
so
Interesting.
a boulder instead of rocks, it's oyster mounds. So these sorts of things are huge, and it's not to say you won't find fluke in those areas. And up north, you'll definitely find
Oh, you
fluke in them.
probably find like big fluke.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
definitely will. Right. So, but it's more of a starting point with Southern Flounder. Like drifting the inlet, like and dragging some baits around in the inlet, that's not going to do it. You're going to have
Okay.
you're going to have a very hard time finding those fish. So they
Okay.
really need to stack behind a current break. It's mandatory to have that current break.
That's very
Versus
interesting.
versus summer flounder, yeah, that's a good strategy a lot of the time, but it's not necessarily mandatory.
Not at all. I mean,
Yeah.
guys who, they just drift and dream and they can manage to, you
Yep.
know,
Pull
catch a
out a
few
10
keeper.
pounder every now and then. Yeah, with the southern flounder, to pull out a 10 pounder drifting and dreaming through like an inlet is a real tall order to fill.
Right, right. So you're targeting hardcover and structure, mostly located with your mapping or
Just
size
reading
scan.
current or just reading the surface.
Okay, so are they now
Like
in ter-
so like you go through a back bay environment, you could just look where the current breaks are.
right,
That's all you need. But
right.
they'll be in those areas where sometimes you might not find fluke. Like the southern flounder, 1 to 2 feet is big enough for an 8 pounder all summer. So it's a different game on that end too. Like you might just very rarely see those larger fluke in some of those environments. Not to say it's not going to happen, but it's kind of a rarer thing. While the southern flounder, that current breaks there, and there's a lot of good bait around for them. Not out of the question one
They
bit.
will say that shallow. So when they're that shallow, what does the water clarity do? Like, does that play a role? It can be crystal clear and they'll be in 1 or 2 feet.
Southern flounder will end up on the same spawning grounds as striped bass are.
Okay. So,
Like they will find southern flounder 60 miles into freshwater.
okay. So
Okay,
even in,
not a
even,
normal thing.
right,
So
right,
they don't have
right.
that. They don't have that need for salinity.
Okay.
Like
But what I meant was more like the color of the water. Like, do they need dirty water to come up that shallow or will they do that?
they still prefer clearer water.
Okay.
But they will be in a cup of coffee too.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because in my
I have an
experience,
easier time getting them to bite in clearer water, especially artificial. But they'll be in that cup of coffee. While Fluke will not. As soon as you get that real summer chalky water showing up in areas, those summer flounder get really hard to find in a lot of zones. They'll start to clear out at least. There'll be some
yeah,
pockets that might be around, but you get that summer flounder, that chalky water that starts coming out of the inlets and stuff like that. That's all stirred up. The summer flounder starts to a lot of them stage on the ocean. But yeah, of course, there's going to be a couple pockets where there's still a few around, but it doesn't seem to. It's all about bait with those southern flounder. If there's a lot of good bait around still, it could be absolute toilet flush water, and they'll be there.
right. Jeez, that's very interesting. Because in my experience, like I've caught some big fluke very shallow, but generally not when the water is gin clear. When the water is that clear, I feel like they need a little bit of depth and they don't want to come that shallow. Like at least not during the daytime. I don't know what they do at night. But I mean that's the case in a lot of freshwater fisheries too. Or if there's wind, like I was talking to someone else, and wind is such a huge factor to break up that surface, so maybe they don't feel as vulnerable to like birds of prey and stuff like that. But wow, yeah. So southern flounder being that, I mean that sounds like my cup of tea. Like the fact that they can be that shallow, because a lot of the artificial stuff that I'm experimenting with when it comes to fluke and flounder, like the main thing is they don't get that deep, So once the fish is over 12, 13 feet, like I can't really reach them with a jerk bait.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that really is a shame that you can't really target them, at this time.
No,
But you come here for fluke and you did pretty well the last few trips you were
it was
up.
great. I thought it was
Yeah.
some of the best I've seen. In
You
terms
know,
of, I didn't get any last year. I didn't get any large fish. I think my
right.
biggest fish was maybe 24 inches, but the quantity of 20 to 23-inch fish,
I
I
want
had
to, yeah,
never seen that quantity
I
of
want to
20.
ask you about this because without talking about exactly where we were, you want to kayak and me from shore. Last year, around that time, I had a run of like, I think I had a triple limit without catching one fish under 18 inches. And to me, that seems a little weird. Meanwhile, in some of the spots, I would go days without catching a fish over 13 inches. Like I will walk 2, 3 miles of beach and nothing but rats. Like
Wow.
like not even threatening an 18-inch size. So, and then last year everyone was talking about how the upwelling and the south wind kind of killed the season. I mean, it definitely changed things. It was definitely like a very interesting season for me. But like you said, the size of fish in some pockets were incredible.
Yeah.
Just the average size. I think my average size during like that couple week run I mean, it has to be over 21 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
21 to 22 was just like, it was like almost every fish.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is really cool. These are really good sized fish for the most part. You see, the problem with me is I get so much feedback from internet noise. Like everyone just comments every day they're catching 10 pounders from their kayaks. So I just assume like 10 pounders are now the norm based on comment section stuff. Well, and I get both sides of it. There's no fish where there's 10 pounders everywhere. So like I just have to literally no longer pay attention to any of the
No,
noise.
no, you
It's just
don't.
literally constant bombardment of I caught a 10 pounder this morning before my cup of coffee,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the guy who says I
Yeah.
haven't
Well,
in
yeah, I get a lot of those DMs too, and to me it's like, where's the scale picture? Where's the
I mean, it
root?
doesn't like I just like I said, I have to just enter my own small world,
Yeah,
a couple of
exactly.
guys I fish with, and that's about it at that point because you tell me one thing and then somebody else tells me, oh, I got 4 10 pounders this year from my kayak. I'm like, okay. I'm like, sounds like it's pretty good where that is.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like 10 pounders just grow on trees. But look, the here's the thing last year, and this is from myself traveling and talking to people. We had those really good trips. If you were somewhere else, that would not have happened. I
Interesting.
mean, it was very localized, and a lot of charter boats and party boats just kind of struck out the entire season, depending on where they were. Which makes sense if you look at like the stock structure. From what I understand, it's certainly shrinking, and a lot of it is shifting north. And you're gonna get years where things don't really add up. When a population shrinks, like there's gonna be local abundance here and there, but in terms of the overall picture, like guys just going out, I mean, 3, 4 years ago, Fluke was the least location dependent species. Like I could have
Yeah.
gone to any beach, launched my kayak anywhere, and if you give me 5, 6 hours, like I'm gonna catch a limit. Last year was not like that. So I'm very interested to see what this year brings, because if it was just a south wind, then great.
And that comes to my also what then I put my own goggles on of like every time I'm fishing, it's pretty good because I guess I've been around enough that I can, so I don't hit, maybe I like for fluke, maybe I struck out once or twice in a month-long period.
Yeah.
And that was also because I was trying something new versus going back to the fish that I knew was there,
Right, right, right,
because I'm on the unfortunate bandwagon of content. So, doing the same thing is not a content wise strategy. So
right.
got to roll the dice. But that ends up being, pretty much how life goes for me eventually. Like you try 3, 4 plays, and I have that luxury. I can fish twice in a day somewhere sometimes, right? Like everyone was the same thing as the Roward and Striper stuff. People were saying it was tough last year. I popped in for 3 days and I thought it was just as good as ever, right?
Right, right.
Also, just like, I evaluated whatever knowledge I had about stuff. Everyone said there's no fish out deep. Okay, I'll go fish shallow. Oh, the fish shallow right now. But apparently then then one guy, same thing. Oh, I caught 4 50 pounders this week. And
Yeah.
then there's a bunch of comments with the bites they've been shutting down from boat traffic. I just don't know. So I get into my own localized bubble.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you certainly have enough to draw on. I mean, people, like a lot of the doc talk about fishing, it's just, because fishing is so, like, it's not an exact science, right? Like there's certainly a level of luck involved. And most people get to fish once a week, right? So how are you going to pattern that when you're out once a week? Like most people who own boats and they go out, they're either following the party boats around, or the because the entire year they might fish a dozen trips. Like with any fishery, I mean, Fluke was sort of like that for me last year, but more so like in freshwater. If you're gonna go learn a lake, you gotta be there from ice out to ice in to really know like where those fish are going and where they're gonna be next, right?
Absolutely.
And you can't just go out like once a week. Like
Right.
you need to stay on those fish. So I get it. Like people need to find time to get out when they can, and but in terms of you popping your kayak down somewhere and not finding fish, that's not the end of the world for you. Like 10 other spots to go find or go look at least, seasonally. And yeah, I mean that's just time on the water. But sticking with Fluke in this conversation for now, I want to ask you, like, in terms of Gulp, I noticed that you started moving away from it a few years
Started
ago.
using it. I still use it again a lot too. There, I have my formulas of when I use Gulp
Okay.
and what times of year, um, and what environments and what species. I get very particular. Gulp is very Gulp is when I'm searching a brand new area. I'll throw a Gulp to see how much junk I'm going to get on it. And if I'm not getting much junk, I'll probably stick with it very often.
Now, does that apply to when you're fluking? Like, are there times and areas where you won't use Gulp, or is this
Oh
some
yeah,
other? Okay, but
very.
is a consideration because of the catch rate, or are you just thinking about, maybe you want to try something new?
It gets very environmentally specific in my head, and maybe I overthink it too much. But at the minute I understand there's scup and sea robins in this environment, that's when the experimentations happen. Sometimes it's areas of just straight fluke. I'm probably going to be on gulp and not
Okay,
really.
so you're talking about not using Gulp to keep the nuisance species away. Right. Okay. But if it's just in terms of if you needed to catch a fluke to save your life, is Gulp what you're using?
Most areas, yes,
Yeah.
but not every single area.
Okay. Okay.
Most areas, yes.
Right.
And Gulp's got some pretty cool products I saw. I used in the Keys. So they had the 3-inch shrimp for years, which, doesn't do much. It does catch fish, but like when you throw it, you're like kind of, it'll spin on a cast,
Yeah, it does nothing. Yeah.
got a mind of its own, but it does, well, whatever, it works. They have this new turbo shrimp you should check out. It's got like these legs this was an Australian, I forgot the name of the shrimp lure, that it was a non-scented one, but it had like these curly, and now the legs kind of run like a real shrimp.
Right. Like against the current, the legs
Yeah.
are gonna flutter. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Really good action. A little hard to rig. You got to get really specific on the size of the jig heads because it's got a tight body.
Right.
So rig on everything perfectly. But those new shrimps have awesome, awesome action. Forget the old Gulp shrimp that they call it the turbo shrimp now.
Okay.
Not Penn's original. Maybe it was, and maybe
Right.
I.
Well,
I
I remember Gulp had the mantis shrimp, which had the twin curly tails at the end.
or the creature bait. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this new one is I've only seen this product from I think the company's called Holt Productions, and it was an Australian company, and their specific shrimp had like those legs that run on the retrieve, like it
Mm-hmm.
had 4 legs on the
Oh,
shrimp lure.
so this is not a Gulp. This is just a different.
Oh, sorry. This is a gulp, but there was a
Oh,
non-gulp
right, right. Okay, yeah,
brand out of Australia that
yeah.
had this shrimp lure.
I see.
It wasn't available in the United States. I got my hands on them maybe 5 years ago. Best shrimp lure I've ever used for
And
sure.
it's interesting that you bring up shrimp because the couple times I was down south many years ago, like I was at Houston, my godmother lives there. Shrimp is like, I mean, shrimp is like a killie down there. Like they use it for everything.
I mean, it's the biggest forage too down there. It's
Okay.
really a huge forage. Like, I mean, it's in the Northeast, but not. I mean, they have mantis shrimp too, but
Yeah, no.
white shrimp and brown shrimp, and the Chesapeake Bay is loaded with those too. So I don't know about Delaware Bay having huge quantities of them, but like as you get to most of the coast, probably 3/4 of almost 3/4 of the coast, Shrimp is a huge forage.
Right. I mean, it's not, I mean, up here we have grass shrimp early season. That's a big deal, but they're tiny.
Right.
You know, they're not, and also I was talking about this on this other podcast I was on. They asked me because I brought this up. Like early season up here, Fluke are mostly feeding on shrimps and crabs,
Yep.
right? And they asked me, well, then do you use like the Gulp shrimp or Gulp crab? And I'm like, no, I don't, because I never found Fluke to be very mash the hatch when it comes to, you know, it's
Very rare you need to do that.
right,
I feel like that. I agree with that. Like the flatfish, you get it in their face and you get through everything else.
yeah,
Odds are pretty good.
and especially if you're using Gulp. I
Right.
feel
But
like
there's
if you're using
only
Gulp,
circumstances I think that outlier really stands is in really cold water and in really hot water. You'll get these different versions of fluke that are not going to match about 80% of the other time of the season, where you're going to just be like, they're turning their nose on everything in extreme cold temperatures and they're really eating just weird old school stuff like a spearing this big is the only thing
mm,
working,
yeah,
or in extreme warm temperatures, or really they're only going to eat those live mullet or live peanut bunker, and they can get a little weird. So
right.
those are the extreme ends of the seasons typically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, cold water, I have a lot of experience with. Warm water fluke that you're describing, I can't say I've come across. Although, to me, by that point in the season, bait is the main thing. Like, what kind of bait is in the water?
Yeah.
You know, like I will catch a lot on the lipless crankbait, but only when the peanuts are very thick. Otherwise, you might catch one or two, but it's not really a numbers game.
I
But
mean, sometimes I used to have theories that those fish would sit there for tides on the end and not budge probably and just plant into the mud
yeah,
until the right conditions cause them to feed. And I you like a lot of times in some environments, the oxygen depletion will take them. You automatically think to go to the deepest hole in the dead of summer because that's where the coolest water is. But there is oxygen depletion down there, and literally the new strategy is as soon as you get into the hottest temperatures, is to go back to the shallowest areas,
right.
bait rich, and there's a lot of current and sandbars and stuff that's in like 3 to 5 feet again. And that's where the next feed is. And sometimes that carries in all the way to season closing. And sometimes I bump into those fish, and even in the dead of summer, back shallow, and they wouldn't be biting as well until it cooled off just a little bit and there was more bait flushing around. So I think a lot of times you'll lose your deep water bite that carried into just that point of oxygen stratification, whatever you want to call it, depletion zones. And a lot of bays have that the oxygen doesn't carry that well after 10 feet of water.
Yeah, yeah.
Bite that all those big fish will just shove up shallow on a sandbar. And then if it's chocolate milk for a week, still a few stragglers are going to sit around. You
No,
might not have a day of numbers, but you might have a two fish day and one fish was 11 pounds.
yes.
And that's a very common scenario. I've had in one week, I've caught two fish over 10 pounds. And probably in that week, I maybe caught five fish total.
Yeah,
And
no,
the
that
other three might have not been, maybe one was like another decent fish, maybe like a
right,
20 incher, and the other two were postage stamps. And now you're talking an 8 hour session, 2 8 hour sessions maybe involved in that. And
right,
but there was two of the biggest fish of that week, and it happened when there all that mix up of the bite, just the bites over, the bites on the ocean. Right, there's all these massive changes that happen, and a lot of times I'll catch a lot of really big fish in just places that are sometimes a little bit accidental, experimentational, because all the other stuff is no longer producing. You just whatever. Let's see if I
right.
just
It's a process of elimination at that point, and then
desperation. Right.
yeah,
I've never fished here before. I don't know, it's just sand out here. There's no reason there should be biting
right,
again.
right.
And you're like, oh man, there's a 3 foot bite out of nowhere.
No,
This time,
you're absolutely right. That no, that's a lot of juice you just dropped because that heat of summer bite that everyone does assume you go deeper to find that cooler water. Oftentimes it's the opposite.
right on the ocean, this is a different story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no,
Stuff
no.
is
Yeah, I'm
totally different.
talking bays, rivers, like that kind of thing. Like those.
Every body, but in every body of water is different.
Yes.
Some areas don't have this oxygen issue. a lot of areas do have oxygen related issues where stagnant water, or it could be a third thing. Bait just moves shallow.
Yeah.
And right, so you have all these variables, and every body of water gives you a different scenario what to throw at it. And not every year is different. Like some years you won't have too many oxygen issues, and you'll have some beautiful water in the middle of August because it hasn't rained for weeks.
Right, right.
Areas they'll just get some awesome looking water all August.
Yeah, there's
And
no
like
runoff. Yeah.
yeah, so every year it's going to end up being different on that too.
I mean, it's very interesting because like you said, every year is different. Last year, like I mentioned earlier, there were pockets of fish that I found and some were epic. I mean, some of those concentrations of fish that I found lasted like 3 or 4 days. But if you literally went 50, 100 yards left or right of that school of fish, like nothing, which I don't understand at all. That's not my experience with Fluke in the past. But last year it was that. Now, when I fish more from a kayak, you will find patches of fish, and if you can stay on them, it can be a very good bite. You know, even if you come back the next day, if you make the right guesses as to where they went, you could stay on those fish. That shallow summer bite, very interesting. You know,
But
it's
yeah, I remember it didn't happen every year. Some years,
no, no,
I mean, it's just a lot of it for me was related to the water quality would change the shifting of where the fish would be.
right.
And like if you drifted and you didn't get a bite from anything with a gulp 4 inch swimming mullet,
Yeah, there's
you
something wrong
bail.
with that water itself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you better really put your thinking cap on where to look.
right, right. I think I remember you catching an 11 pounder. I can't. So what was your largest fluke that
Well,
12
well,
on
got
YouTube?
not on YouTube. I think my biggest on YouTube was probably 9.8. I don't
Okay.
think I had any tens on YouTube. Um, but I've gotten a couple nines.
I
I don't
mean,
remember.
that's
Gotten like
insane. Yeah.
I just assume now everybody catches tens based on my, but I've gotten 3 over 10 on the kayak and about 4 or 5 9 plus.
Right. No,
Uh,
that's incredible. And you had at least 2 or 3 of those before you moved down to North Carolina, or was that all before you moved down?
all
It was all
before.
before. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I
I haven't
mean,
caught a 10 pound fish in yeah, since probably 2018 or 17.
I
But I
mean,
haven't. I only fish. My fluke fishing now is not very dedicated. Where
right, right,
like
right.
literally, I go and catch a bunch of fish. I'm just happy now.
Yeah, yeah.
So I haven't been as laser focused on it. No, definitely not.
No, fluke. You know, it does. I mean, large fish. See, if it's one large fish, that's why you see a lot of these tournaments. That's one fish tournaments. It's anyone's game to win it because that really, you know. But then to catch consistently over a span of years, having that many large fish, that's really that's what fishing really is to me. In turn, no, if you are keeping score, you know, if you're happy just to go out and pull on any fish, then that's fine. But
That's
if
me.
you're that's you now, yeah, okay,
I don't really
yeah,
care.
yeah,
I'll go catch
okay,
a bowfin and whatever. Now I'm
right,
happy.
right, right. No, I mean it's you know, it really is the average, right? Like over time that people have to look at. And if those tournaments went to 2 fish or 5 fish, I bet you the same people will place in the top 5 or 10 much more regularly. So, um, do you remember what you caught your PB on, or
I,
those 10 pound fish? I'm sure you don't forget them.
I
But
think I'm trying to think. One of them was on the 5 or 6 inch grub.
mhm.
One was on a 4 inch swimming mullet. I think two of them were probably on the 4 inch swimming mullet, and one of them was on one of the larger
The 4 inch or the 5 inch?
the 4 inch.
Wow. And that was just on
Two of
a
them were on the 4 inch swimming mullets for
okay.
sure.
And
One of
those
them
4 inch mullets were on like a
white
spro.
bucktail,
Okay. Right.
single jig, white bucktail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and Yeah, I'd say probably 80% plus were on swimming mullets of some flavor.
Yeah, swimming
Or
mullets back then. I mean, my go-to back then was the 5-inch mullet on like a 3/8 or half-ounce bro, and that caught.
definitely had a few 7 pound class fish on non-gulps, and those were areas where there was a lot of sea bass, I remember.
Mm,
So I definitely had a few in that 7 pound class were non-gulp. The largest southern flounder I caught was on a whole menhaden.
okay, a whole. How big of a menhaden?
Probably not as big, like probably 10-inch one though. Like a
Wha-
big one, not a giant one.
Right, right, but that's still a bit. Jeez, I mean, were you fishing for flounder?
I was fishing an area where I've caught them.
Okay,
I
right.
was just like, let's drop the whole thing down and see what happens. And I caught one. Yeah. It was dead, dude.
Jeez,
It was dead,
yeah.
dude. It was
I mean,
dead. It was probably
yeah,
like a 7 pound southern flounder. So, um, a lot of my southern flounder that were 5, 6 pounds were not on gulp because of the fact that you couldn't fish gulp in those environments
right,
because you
right.
were just getting mobbed by other stuff by the time you worked that. So, a lot of my 5 pound plus southern flounder are not on gulp.
I mean, I've done a lot of back to back and neck to neck kind of comparison between gulp and other soft plastics. Like Kitech caught me a lot of fish at one point. But what I notice is, at least when the water's clear, you might get the same number of bites on gulp versus some other kind of plastic. Your your hookup percentage goes down dramatically with non-gulp.
I noticed if you add that Procure stuff, you have the same reaction
Yes,
time.
that's what I was gonna ask you. Like people think you add Procure to attract fish, and in my opinion, it's that to some extent, but because it's oil based, I don't think it disperses the way gulp does at all.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Definitely.
but once the fish eats it, they're gonna hang on to it for a split second longer and give you time for that
And
hook
I
set.
think everyone gives me shit for using Procure. I think if I narrow down my strike zone, that I should potentially get a bite within a 1 to 2 minute window. That application of Procure is relevant.
Yeah,
But after a certain tight window of time of my jig being in the water, it's pretty much useless at that point. But if I'm like kind of identifying this is my strike zone, it's gonna happen if it's
yeah,
gonna or it's not gonna happen. But there's also like a bunch of sea robins here and other crap too. Or maybe I'm just going to the big profile because I'm evaluating that this is gonna work out for me. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does. I've been outfished by gulp and I've also outfished gulp. I've been on both ends of this. Um, and have seen like I've also been dramatically outfished by gulp and I've also dramatically outfished gulp. So I've seen it all kind of from every angle
right,
imaginable. Um, and it's kind of hard to know going into the day how that's going to play out. It's not like I can have really a good precursor to say how bad I'm going to get outfished or
right,
so like a lot of times I will be like humbled a little bit. Like sometimes someone just fishing a smaller gulp profile and just fighting through 50 shorts puts more fish of quality after
right,
I've been on the end where I watch somebody catch like 5 shorts and I'm like, I ain't using gulp. All he's catching is postage stamps with this gulp. I'm using something else. And maybe I'll catch one or two, and I only have like a 3 fish day and they're all okay, right? But the guy next to me weeded through 60 fish and had like 6 nice fish too.
right, right, right.
So
No,
like
that
I've had that day happen, right? Where I've caught 3 or 4 fish that were all good, but the guy caught 60 and
right,
54 of them, sorry, 58 of them were 56 of them, 55 of them were postage stamps. And I made that call after 5 short fish to say I'm
right.
not using gulp today. Right. And then I've had the days where I've watched the guys feed everything to sea robins and I'm just going so big that a sea robin is not gonna
Yeah, yeah.
outfish them doing that. Or, just like all these gulps are getting torn up by the puffer fish is the one that
Oh,
I've definitely learned that I've outfished the pufferfish days where I've seen guys fishing all the gulps and like the pufferfish love that stuff.
I mean, last year they weren't that thick. The year before, there were weeks where you couldn't use any, like not just Gulp, no soft plastics, you
I mean,
know.
I feel like at a certain size you can get away with it. I used like big paddle tails at 5.5 inches. They were keeping off that stuff.
Okay, right, right. If you go back, I mean, I just went straight to the jerk bait and lipless crankbait, and I mean
Yep.
that was the only thing, you know. And even then, some of the larger, uh,
Grab the treble still. Yeah, I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Ridiculous.
yeah,
But
they,
yeah, I would sometimes get a chunk taken out of it, but I was still limiting out. I remember maybe this was 2 years ago now, with plastics when people I was fishing with were just like going through tubs of Gulp. They were.
yeah,
I was still doing pretty well. But every situation is different on that end. And then it's like, early in the season when there's not too much, maybe the sea robin ratio is not too bad.
yeah.
Your stuff's not that good at that point in the season. So you have to like it comes down to just situational evaluation, situational evaluation,
Yeah,
man.
yeah. I mean, you know, for me at least, from what I've seen, there's no reason to tell people not to use gulp if their goal is just to catch, like, you know, especially from shore when you're not dealing with a lot of nuisance species. When sea robins come in, they're gonna hit almost anything that will fit into their mouth. But other than that, it's you know, there's a lot of room for experimentation. But for me, if you're gonna put like a soft plastic thing on a jig head, you might as well use Gulp if you're fishing from shore. But then if you wanted to do something completely different, that's when like the hard baits and, you know, maybe metals and stuff like that comes into play.
So there's a lot of things you can just start throwing and you won't be just losing a tail immediately and
Yeah,
not.
yeah. I mean,
A lot of times you could throw that gulp up on that sandbar. There might have been a lot of fluke there, but there was probably 700 other things
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. That's the thing. That you know, because then you're not getting any information. If you're not catching, if you're not getting through those fish to catch the fluke, you don't know if there's fish there. So that data point is zero. Um, no, but I mean, I think it really depends where you are. Like, you've caught thousands, tens of thousands of fluke. I've caught thousands of fluke. At a certain point, you want to catch them the way you want to catch them. You know, I mean, you can't just use the exact same thing for like the rest of your life fishing for one species of fish. You know, although some people could, I guess.
You can get close to it. You could probably pull it off if you're really dedicated. You
Yeah,
get
right, exactly. I mean, look, I know with the jig, that jig hook set will never get old for me. Not like not just the hook set, but the actual bite.
Yep.
Like the way a fluke hits a jig most of the time is very aggressive, is very percussive, and then you reel down and you set the hook. That process will never get old to me. But actually just fishing a jig day in and day out, and that's the only thing you do, that's the reason I kind of branch out. But there really is a X number of fish you have to hit in your life to be like, all right, now I've had all my fun with gulp, and now I'm going to experiment because that journey is going to be fun, right? So yeah, that's it. Now leaving fluke aside for 1 second, you okay? Just in terms of species, is there one that you're kind of preoccupied with now more than others, or is it just a completely seasonal rotation of fish?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably pretty much seasonal. Just whatever's on my mind for that season that's attainable.
Right.
It changes every year, but I'd say it's just whatever I find to be fun for that moment.
Okay.
You know,
So
I'm enjoying more. Typically, it's just going to diverse areas that are gonna throw random challenges at me, and I'm just gonna have to be like, it's gonna be throwing the darts, and so I like to just go into areas that I know there's an umbrella of stuff I'm probably gonna have to, potentially keep in the back of my head and see what surprise gets thrown at me.
right. So you've been all right. So winter, you will make your trip down to the Keys.
Right, the last couple of years, last this year I spent 2.5 months in the Keys, and I love the Florida
Right,
Keys.
right. That looks very fun. I mean, that multi-species crappie jig you were doing in your last couple of videos, I mean, that looks so much fun.
Yeah, you just don't know, and they're like, it's a place where giant fish eat tiny things, It's a place
Yeah.
where small fish eat tiny things, a place where colorful fish eat tiny things, with
Right.
toothy fish,
I I was
desirable
gonna
fish.
ask.
Everything can eat everything there.
Right, 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 right,
So,
right.
I mean, for the most part, it's a fishery where going over 4 inches or 5 inches tops really narrows down what you're going to see at the end of your line.
Okay.
Two and a half, that even that 2 inch to 4 inch range,
Mm,
you are going to see literally just, it ain't going to be like, just small stuff on the end of
right,
your line regularly. You're going to see the most desirable species like big snappers and groupers on that, to tiny stuff like this.
right,
Tarpon, like it all falls in under that small umbrella of like, did I rig properly? Is this
right,
20
right.
millimeter going to hold up? Oh, I went to 30 pound. That was a mistake. No, I'm going to use 8 pound because I'm catching a lot. Like there's just like this
Yeah.
wheel of
Yeah,
variability.
that's what I was thinking when I was watching. I was like, if I were down there, I want to try BFS like 8 pounds, 6 pound. But then you pull up some giant fish. I was all right. Wait a minute, that probably might not work. You
Right.
know.
Where your hooks are going to open up, whatever. Like all these things are adding to this wheel of like uncertainty.
Right, right,
Like everything can kind of screw it up a little bit. Like going over 20 pound leader is like a big mistake in terms of your bites that you're gonna end up seeing. But like, okay, the grouper don't care and the tarpon don't care, but are they gonna bite because everything here today is just snapper and the snapper
right,
is gonna be the more cautious. You're just like, oh man,
right.
how do
No, I
I?
mean that looks like an incredible fishery. The So winter Key West, you're in North
Yeah, middle key,
Carolina.
but yeah,
Right.
middle
And
key.
then you will make that month long plus or minus trip up to the Jersey, New York region in the
Or
summer.
yeah, some years, yeah, some years I don't. Probably this year I'll end up doing it again. Um, I like to stop at the Chesapeake Bay too because I like that fishery too. The Chesapeake Bay is a lot of fun.
Okay.
I don't haven't spent much time in between the Chesapeake and the Long Island area. Like
Right.
that area, I'm not that familiar with, besides from one or two trips here and there.
Right.
Like South Jersey, like these are big areas where my head doesn't really know
Yeah.
where I'm at too well. And not to say I know much about the Chesapeake, and not to say I know much about Long Island these days. Or not. So what happens is you become a jack of all trades, master of none, right? So right now I have literally no expertise in any fishery.
Right. Well, you don't have up to
Oh,
the minute expertise, but you have the knowledge. So if someone plugs you into that situation, like you can figure it out very quickly.
maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like literally I just bounce around, fish like a Googan everywhere, and then you really don't know anything anymore because you don't spend enough time on a fishery. So you just literally pop in and be like, oh, I worked out, oh, that worked out. Like, but you're just kind of sightseeing. Like, so basically I become maximum tourist angler.
Right, right.
I'm
No,
just
I mean
literally
that's you have your basic set of skills in terms of rigging and choosing your base and presentation. So you have all that.
I'm not chasing bites. That's definitely not something I try not to do. But
Right.
I definitely just run into locations and say, "Oh, that looks feature rich. Let's go fish here." That's literally all I do. This
Right.
looks feature
But
rich.
I mean that's very important because I always saw you as like a structure kind of fisherman. Like you're most comfortable when you can identify some kind of structure to fish on. With maybe the exception of striped bass and Raritan Bay or something like that.
Yeah,
But
sight fishing is definitely my biggest weakness still to this day. I would say sight fishing does sometimes intimidate me.
sight fishing in terms of what? Like actually seeing the fish and casting
Yeah,
to them? Well,
yeah,
yeah. I mean that like I can't imagine with our background in the Northeast, you don't have that much practice doing that.
yeah. So
You
that's
know.
still is kind of, I feel like, always a weakness. Um, some top water stuff is still kind of a weakness of mine. I'm not the best top water fisherman. I feel like I've never committed long enough. I always default to something that goes lower in the water column. So top water is a live bait. I've gotten worse at live bait fishing because I just like I used to do a good chunk of it in the Northeast, but I do it less now. So I feel like I've gotten far more intimidated by live bait fishing. So, and I also, I don't like interacting with sharks on my kayak. So live bait, I always try to, that's like the nuclear button for me is I really try to avoid most of my live bait fishing and cut bait fishing. So bait fishing's gotten worse for me. Maybe crabs is the only thing I'm still regularly putting into my
Okay.
arsenal. But every other bait, I like very sporadic that I end up doing it. And I think it's all the prep work and the just buy a boat. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
work of live bait, like live bait fit. Every time I try it, I just say, why am I bothering with this on this platform
yeah,
where I can microfish everything so much more efficiently
yeah.
versus trying to, and like some days, yeah, bait worked out pretty good, but
Yeah,
you
no, I know exactly what you mean because the couple of times, even last year I did a killie video on Fluke, and killies are like the easiest things to keep alive. You just put them in a dry cooler or something. But on the links, I have like no extra room to put anything. That killie box ended up like next to my foot, like next to the pedals all day, and it's just a nightmare. I
that's kind of how I feel about it too. So I kind of always just like every time I try it again, I kind of, you know, scrap it.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about how sometimes like last year I got to see the scenarios where I did well against Gulp with Pro
Mm-hmm.
Cure or like, I haven't been in scenarios where another kayak angler is fishing live bait and I'm doing my thing because I'm just covering more water
Oh
immediately.
yeah, for sure.
So it's like you just take a different, maybe at the end of the day you can reconvene. But like I haven't fished with anyone like that in a long, long, long time. So a lot of times I go out on my own fetch quest and that's it. Like it's a different game altogether because now I'm covering more water. Picking off more zones. So it's hard to keep
Yeah,
up with.
I mean it's
What
hard
am I,
to.
what am I missing out on? I don't know what I'm
Yeah,
missing.
yeah, yeah. No, you and you'll never know.
Yeah.
That's the thing because with fishing, you almost need a time machine to go back and recreate that cast to see if, because I mean, I guess now I was kind of ranting about this with Sea Money a lot. Just live scope changing everything about freshwater bass fishing and
I've
everything.
seen it firsthand in salt too
Yeah,
recently.
yeah,
I'm starting to see it. I remember, I'll give you a quick one, then you could talk
no,
about,
yeah.
because I saw it at Sheephead in the Chesapeake Bay where you're going through structure. And I spent 2 hours guessing and I caught some nice fish.
Mm-hmm.
But just seeing the efficiency of somebody, and I was just like, man, I felt like a dinosaur next to that. The fact that somebody could just comb through everything around me and not even waste their time. Like, am I gonna get a bite on my crab? Like,
Yeah, no,
I help them
they're
get.
literally looking at their crab and seeing if fish are coming out and seeing how the fish are interacting with their bait. Everything we've talked about up until this point is the fact that fishing is guessing. It's like
Yes,
you never know what I mean, on the rare occasions when you're vertically jigging off a 2D. I mean that's the extent of seeing your bait and seeing the fish on the same screen is when you're vertically 2D fishing. But that happens like 5% of the time, at least in saltwater. Like I do that a lot in freshwater, but having live scope, you can do that for every cast for the rest of your life.
okay, for stationary fish. Yep.
For stationary fish, and also like the marine units are scanning out 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
I mean there's going to be applications where you don't think people will use live scope, and in 2 or 3 years time everyone is going to be using live scope. For me personally, it's I don't want to call it not fishing, but it's not the fishing that we've done up until this point. Like for the 200,000 year history of our species, we've not had
Right. And
this kind of fishing.
I do want to be kind of objective. Like, for years I got shit for having a fish finder on my kayak.
People
Right.
make that argument, but it's a bad argument. But anyway, yes.
But like still, it's the same thing. I was, a decade ago, the modern internet fisherman.
Yeah.
Now I'm no longer the modern. Like it's replaced with an even
No.
more modern class
No. Yeah.
of technology based fishermen. Like So like to me, being ancient is like, I still look at Google Maps regularly. Like, oh, no,
Well,
you're just like,
Google Maps is a huge. I mean, I would say before live scale mapping is the biggest.
yeah.
You
But
know.
now it's just like gotten to the point of like, you know, I still want to use my manual, like my electric pedal kayak. I love it because I can manually take over.
Yes.
Most people
Yes.
hate that. Like they don't even need that option. Like, but I've been decades of like taught myself how to react with my pedals to
Right.
position. But now I'm seeing people are able to do exactly what I kind of want to do with their electronic systems. They've gotten so much more, fast. Like put somebody in their early 20s with the remote on their Minn Kota.
Yeah.
Be surprised how quick and good they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Versus me, when I had that Minn Kota remote, I was getting by, but it didn't feel as intuitive because I didn't spend a decade growing up with it.
Yes.
Well, I
And
see
that
somebody else who now can use that remote
yeah.
as intuitively as I use my
Right,
feet.
right. They could anticipate, when to push, left, right, spot lock. And it's the same deal with live scope. Like if you just let, I mean, this is the last thing I'll say on this. I'm sure everyone is sick of hearing me talk about this, but if you look at the professional bass fishing tour,
Yeah,
19, 20, 21-year-old kids are placing like
yeah,
top fives, right? And sure, everyone can use the technology, but they've been using it since it came out when they were high school fishing
right.
and college team fishing, and this is all they do. And if you listen to them talk about it, they're not talking about patterns the way we are. They're talking about bite percentages where they'll line up like six different jig heads with the same bait and then just cast to the same pot of fish and then recording how many approaches they get on screen, right? With different weight jig heads. This is how they're practicing for tournaments now.
Yeah, I mean, like, I urge anyone who doesn't have access to the scenarios, just hang out with somebody under 10 years old and see how quick they're able to navigate through their phone versus
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
And anyone in that 10-year-old range, it's going to take you 10 years to get back to that speed, that how fast
Yeah,
they're moving through their phones and so you put live scope in my hands, it's going to take me a long time to master it like somebody that's 19 years old,
right, for sure.
and I won't be able to get the same results out of it. So
No,
more than likely, I won't. I mean, maybe I'll have a little different intuition, but I think at the end of the day, I might not be able to get the same based on my experience in the last 5 years of watching some younger people, not all, but some
right,
younger
right, right.
people work their remotes on their Minn Kota kayaks, whatever. Just seeing their intuitiveness, and like I said, I was getting by and was able to anticipate current movement. I've been on the water for 200 days
Right.
here for almost a decade, but at the same time, seeing that how they're their brain is just able to pick up on
Right.
stuff that me at 38 years old I'm just a little bit slower, and I desire certain things because for a decade that was my way of controlling my
Yeah,
environment.
yeah. No, I mean that's absolutely true. And with any age group, I mean just with people in general, there's a whole bell curve variation of aptitude, and fishing is certainly part of that. Learning 2D and mapping, size scan was a big one. I mean,
Yeah,
those are all, people can have them on their boats for a long time and never really learn like how to
right.
use them properly. Whereas you can really put the time in and like spend 4 hours graphing, like not even making a cast if you're dedicated to that.
Yeah,
And just one last thing, all of that traditional sonar versus live, the difference is not live. Like you're looking at historical data, right?
yeah.
With all that stuff. You're not looking at individual fish or pods of fish and your bait at the same time and seeing how,
Right. And that goes back to me feeling like I'm about to be phased out of some
yeah,
fisheries.
I mean I mean some fisheries, I mean the good thing for you is you're so broad in your content, like in terms of the kinds of fishing that you do. If you're a bass fishing channel, like a freshwater bass fishing channel, and you don't get on that live scoping train, I mean, you're not competing.
Yeah.
You're not catching the fish that these 20-year-old kids are catching with live scope. I
Yeah.
mean, how much experience kind of like a 19-year-old kid won the Elite Series down at Lake Fork. This was his first event last year, and he won against guys who, in their off days, are guides on Lake Fork in Texas.
Wow.
And then people say, well, it's just like any. No, it's really not. It really is a complete sea change. But fluke is probably going to be one of the last species to be affected. So, but that's coming too, because sooner or later that technology in terms of the separation, is going to get good enough that
I've heard like some people speculate it's going to give like heat, like heat, some sort of heat, feedback,
yeah, exactly, like some
like
kind of, well,
something
really
living.
it's, yeah, like it's going to be that, it's going to be AI when they start interpreting data the right way for you. You're going to be able to see different species of fish on there. Like right now, a big thing is guys don't know what they're looking at. Like, is that a carp? Is that a catfish? Or is that a bass? But the guys who are top fiving every tournament, they know what they're looking at. But then
Yeah.
soon, yeah, soon everyone's going to be able to tell because it's just going to show you. Um, but in any case, I want to ask you for fluke, and I noticed this with freshwater bass as well. Like I said, last year I went very big in bait size. And I've noticed that there is a cutoff. Like it's not the bigger the better. For me, it was around that tiny clash, that 7-inch size in freshwater that was catching me the biggest bass. And for fluke, because I've tried the 8-inch grub. No bueno, no good. All right. The six
Even
inch,
the 6 inches starts to get. I think when you get out in the ocean side, you could still use that pretty effectively.
yeah,
But you have such a weird, your depth is so extreme, your current speeds can be so extreme
yeah,
that they're kind of weird. I always find that 4 inch and 5 inch is typically that sweet spot of. Um, I think the sink rate is right. I still think having a good sink rate is important, even to attract that initial investigation from the
yes.
fish.
Like you're talking about a faster fall.
Right, and also a cleaner fall. Like someone's
Yes.
not fighting you, you don't feel like too much extra resistance from the actual all the material of the
Right.
lure you're throwing down there. Or
Yeah.
like, sometimes something's gonna have the right action to draw a fish in, but like some of these gulp baits, as we talked back with the shrimp, like the twirling 4 inch shrimp that you cast into the helicopters,
Yeah.
it hits the water like it's not doing anything. So some things are probably going to give you that reaction, even though if they're kind of larger because they just had, like a fluke bait, just those tails. Even though it's kind of like a 6 inch fluke bait, it's still, shimmering with its tail. As long as it's rigged properly, it's not
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
current.
mean there's a like speaking of fall rate, that's one of the main reasons I pretty much only use the 6-inch jerk shad if I'm using gulp.
Okay,
Because of that faster fall rate. If I wanted it to fall
you don't
fast,
use the 5 inch one.
no.
Interesting.
Yeah,
5 inch
because
is good too.
yeah, I mean I just like in my experience the 6 is the size that you'll catch the most keepers on throughout the course of
Okay.
like a year. Like
What about earlier in the season? Have you tried going smaller to see when the water's colder to see if there's any difference? No.
no, I will slow down the jigging a little bit.
Those are good.
Yeah, like if the water, or not slow it down, but I will keep it closer to the bottom,
Yeah.
and I would do a little bit longer pauses in between because just like cold water fish anywhere, they need time to get to that bait.
Yeah.
But other than that, not really. And conversely, the other thing I might do when the water is really cold is to jig very aggressively. Like get it to come up off the bottom much further, like 8, 9 feet up, and just let it drop straight down. So you're not covering a lot of distance. Like I'm not pulling it as far, but I'm just repeatedly popping it right on top of their head.
And get
Um,
those dead stick bites.
yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
those those two, but no, I don't really experiment with size that much since I found, I mean, between me, my cousin, like a dozen fluke, around 7, almost 8 pounds from shore. So it's like someone will have to show me like there's another size or profile that works as good, or but I mean, it's all like, to me, that straight tail is the most versatile in that you can impart the kind of speed and action you want to it.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of the curly tails kind of slow you down. And the 6-inch grub, unless you have it on like a 3/4 ounce head or higher, that tail is not even swimming on the way down.
Yeah.
So, but I
And
mean,
the other thing is too, you start to need different setups too
yeah,
for that. Your rod
exactly,
actions start to
exactly.
get important because you start using that 6-inch bait. You're not going to be able to move it with the same
No,
velocity that you can use the move
no,
a 5-inch, jerk shad or a 6-inch jerk shad. And even though, you don't factor in the weight of the plastic you put in sometimes, you're really factoring in mentally more the weight of your jig head. But
yeah,
then you threw in an ounce of plastic on that.
yeah. That thing's about an ounce. Like the 6-inch jerk shad is,
There we go. We got a tub right at the desk here.
yeah, yeah. That, like, the 6-inch jerk shad is a little over 3/8 of of an ounce. So you pair that to a 1/4 ounce jig head, you're already over half an ounce.
Like there's another world of charts to kind of understand, like, when is a 1/4 ounce jig head, at what size bait does a 1/4 ounce jig head become ineffective?
Yeah, I mean, people
You might be
need
able to still throw a 3/4 ounce jig head in 5 feet of water with a bait this big,
exactly, exactly.
but
It's, that's what people, yeah, it's not an absolute mass or weight. It's really the combination, because it's the water resistance and it's how fast you can move it through the water.
right, because a lot of times, you know, I throw ounce and a half in like 10 feet of water, but I'm using just giant
Mm,
things to like
yeah,
react for stripers. But then
yes,
you could still fish a 1/4 ounce jig with a small profile in that same depth.
right.
And but you like now you need multiple setups, and it's always all these variabilities. So
Difference between sheep's head and tog. They both they both eat crab, but you mentioned to me that, when you were down there the first couple years, you were learning a lot about sheep's head fishing.
sheepshead are a total water column fish.
Okay.
They are not necessarily a bottom. You can catch plenty of big ones on the bottom, but the better, there's going to be times of the year where they're only 10 feet down over 30 feet of water.
Okay. But are they always are they next to structure as long as it's
They
vertical
are
structure?
more adaptable than tog.
Okay.
So they will be on rocky structures. They will move completely off structures with tides. So they aren't like setting up shop like a tog's going to sit in that hole very often, or maybe for a season. Sheepshead will show up like a freaking bluefish.
Okay. Very
Uh,
interesting. That, like, I did not know that at all. So let's say you're targeting sheep's head that are suspended.
right.
Are
Those suspended ones are more, not every time, but very much more likely to be associated with vertical structure.
okay.
You
So
can find suspended sheepshead on a boulder, right?
right.
But when you really start to spend the time to like look for sheep's head and you want them, you're really looking at that vertical structure more often to find
Right.
them.
And when you're targeting those fish, are
Hmm.
you dropping a crab and then holding it above their head, or are you letting the current sweep it
I
past them,
generally like to try to aim for getting it just down below them a little bit. I find
below
that they're
them?
more likely to come down a little bit than
Okay.
try to come up a little bit. When
Interesting.
you're like in somewhere like in 10 feet, you think they're down there in about 10 feet of water. Um, I always find they're more likely not to come up to 5 feet to try to, because a lot of times you are guessing unless you're like me, right? You're jack of all trades, master of none. I don't have sections on my line, like,
Right, right,
the sheep that are 10 feet down. I didn't know that going into my
right,
day of fishing because I didn't fish there for 2 months to know my sheep that are 10 feet down for the whole month. Right. So
right.
I'm kind of guessing a little bit. In general, most of my experience on that is to go a little bit below them and use a light enough jig that you're not kind of just like kind of scaring them, but
Okay.
they're just gonna follow it down a little bit and they won't have sometimes they'll you can experiment. I've had them fall all the way down to the bottom from 30. Like you can fish and they'll
Right,
come down 10 feet. And sometimes I'll get lucky with my dinosaur sonar to see like, hey, oh, I'm seeing a line come down from 10 and oh, it's a sheep's head.
right. So sometimes like you'll see them follow it all the way and then eat it on the bottom.
Yes.
That's so interesting. That's almost like smallmouth when I'm vertically fishing for them. Most of the
And,
time they want it above them, but sometimes they want it below.
yeah, and so they'll end up following it and all that stuff. So they're kind of a wacky fish that they have a lot less rules than you think. They're just like
Right, right.
they'll show up in just some insane places too, at least
Interesting.
around here. So, but different strains, different environments, they might have different strains based on region. Like the Chesapeake fish do certain things, the South Atlantic fish do certain things.
Got it.
Not necessarily like they'll end up in some brackish water here where there's gar and catfish even sometimes.
Wow.
They have enormous range in this part of the country. So everywhere it's different. And there might not be, less pelagic in some areas. Who knows?
Right, right.
You
And
know, they are old fish generally too, so they'll live, 20. They have they've aged some of the sheep's head here in North
mhm.
Carolina to be 35 years plus.
Wow. So that's similar to Tog in that sense.
I think
Like
even older.
right, right, right.
So that they
Interesting.
can live a very, very long time. Sometimes they'll grow quickly. I think some of the studies that say that, yeah, they can grow up, to 22 inches in just 5, 6 years. But sometimes, like old fish will also just still be 24 inches. So they'll have
Right.
all sorts of stuff. They're mysterious fish in some of those regards. And artificial lure fishing, forget it. Like, so I also have like as I said, there's strains of these fish. The fish that are in the Gulf of America are more likely to eat artificial. I've noticed I've caught them on artificial almost every time I'm over there. And I've caught them on the Keys bridges and the Everglades on artificial. In North Carolina, I've caught like just so few for the amount of time I've spent targeting them. And in areas I'm just throwing lures that they should eat in theory in other environments. So it's like they get everything, like everything, they get specific to their environments and the strains. So I just like to, yeah, just keep an open mind on all of it.
That's very interesting. I mean, I've watched you catch sheep's head. You're the only person I watch catch sheep's head because I have very little interest in the fish otherwise. But they're nothing like Tog, apparently. They're because in my head they both eat crab, and I thought you would just lay their bait on the bottom just like you fish for Tog. But no,
Mhm.
completely
They could
different.
be a lot more aggressive at times than Tog will be. Um, in certain environments, like I said, you can probably use those little cranky crab lures and
Hmm.
little savage gear crabs and a lot of this stuff and probably have pretty interesting results with it. But in certain places that won't work.
Yeah,
Don't
got it.
bother. So
Well,
that's that.
listen, I know you have to go. I appreciate it. There's probably 30 more podcasts from your wealth of knowledge, but we'll see how far we get. I mean, I appreciate the time, and hopefully, if you come back up on your next trip, we can maybe hang out. We'll see what happens.
Sounds good, man.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Elias. Take care.
Later.